Dead America, the Second Month, The Texas Panhandle, Part 2. Written by Derek Slayton. Narrated by Aaron Smith. Chapter 1. Day 0 plus 43. Rebuild Day 13. The moans coming from the trailer park neighborhood continued to grow in intensity as an ever-growing mob of flesh-eating ghouls shambled towards Jackie. The cacophony of noise fell on deaf ears as the young punk singer stared down at her fallen comrade, Chet. The wounds on the side of his head oozed blood from where the vicious bikers had caved it in with their boots mere moments before. Chet, she stammered, voice cracking. The shock was all-consuming for her, rendering her unable to move or really comprehend the violence she'd just witnessed. She didn't know the men well, but having two of them killed right in front of her, including a brutal curb-stomping, was more than she could handle. The moans from the zombies continued to grow as they shambled towards her, no more than 40 yards away from her now. As she fidgeted with her fingers, they grazed the stump where her pinky used to be. She gasped at the sharp pain, and this snapped her back into reality and out of her shock-induced trance-like state. She broke her stare away from Chet and looked over towards the zombies that were slowly coming her way. They were spread out across a 10-yard line, with several rows of them emerging from the sides of the trailers. She looked past them at a couple of piles of ghouls feasting on the still somewhat fresh corpses of Zane and the biker. Jackie looked down at Chet, her gut telling her not to leave him behind. Reality check kicked in, however, as another wave of moans hit her ears. There was no way she'd be able to drag him the half-mile or so to the horses, let alone get him up onto one of them. She gasped, shaking her head. I'm sorry, Chet. There's nothing I can do. She clamped her jaw shut, quivering as she turned away from him, pulling herself together enough to tear back towards the horses. It was a long run, but she was more and more at ease as the moans faded away. She didn't look back, knowing she didn't want to see what the mob was doing to the sheriff. She didn't need any more horrific imagery haunting her. When she reached the horses, they were agitated due to the moaning in the distance. She tried to undo Chet's horse, but he wasn't having any of it, immediately bucking and ripping the reins from her hand and running to freedom. Or death, whichever found him first in this hellscape. Jackie took a moment with her own horse, hoping that she could calm him down enough to be able to get on. Luckily, she was able to unlatch him from the post, climbing up onto his back. The last remaining horse was growing louder and more agitated, afraid of the oncoming noise. Jackie pulled a knife from her saddlebag and leaned over to slice down violently, cutting through the reins and setting the creature free. As it ran off, she leaned down to her own steed, patting him on the side of the neck. "Please just get me back to town," she whispered. The horse gave a whinny as if he were answering her, and relieved, Jackie gently gave him a tap to get him moving in the right direction. It wasn't a particularly fast pace, but she didn't mind. There was plenty of daylight, and it was a long journey back to town. Chapter 2. Most of the day had passed as Jackie's horse was down to a slow walk as they got closer to town. She was parched and sunburnt, but determined to get back before nightfall. Finally, as the sun hung low in the sky behind her, the train came into view on the horizon. "Thank God," she whispered hoarsely, giving her horse a little bit of encouragement to pick up speed. He did so gladly, as if he knew they were almost home. Almost there," she cooed. As they approached the barricaded underpass at the edge of town, yells erupted in the distance from the guards on top. She was worn out, about to drop, and sagged in the saddle as several people climbed over the barricade to run to her. Alonzo and Ethan were the first to reach her, helping her down from the horse as one of the other guards took care of the animal. "My God, what happened?" Alonzo asked, his voice strained. "Are you okay?" Ethan added. "Where are the others?" She shook her head, letting them hold her up. "They're all gone," she said, and held up her hand, showing the wound poorly wrapped in a very bloody handkerchief. Alonzo's eyes widened to saucers. "We need a medic, now!" he screamed. It's fine," Jackie slurred. "Bullshit, it's fine," he barked. "You're getting help now." She nodded, head sluggish, not wanting to argue with his tone. "Just get the mayor out here, though," she said, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "We have a situation." "Ethan, go get the mayor," Alonzo said. "Just take her to the courthouse," one of the cowboys instructed. "I'll bring the doc to you." "Okay," Alonzo replied in full-on caretaker mode. He leaned down. "Jackie, can you walk?" he asked softly. "Yeah," she said. "Just let me borrow a shoulder." He slipped an arm around her waist so she could reach up and grip his broad shoulder, and approached the barricade. Somebody buzzed up in a golf cart, and they sat down onto the seats, Jackie blissful to be on a flat seat that wasn't bouncing around. Alonzo kept his arm around her, not prompting her to speak even as she blinked back tears, avoiding his gaze. She was glad for his understanding. Ethan and Alonzo led her inside the courthouse, the latter supporting her as the former opened doors, heading to a small office just off of the main doors that had been turned into a makeshift sitting area. "There you are," Mayor Collier cried, leaping to his feet. "What happened out there?" "Where's the doctor?" Alonzo snapped. The mayor waved him off. "He's a couple minutes out," he said. "Now, I need to know what happened." Alonzo glared at him, helping Jackie to sit in a padded office chair, motioning to a stack of bottled water in the corner. Ethan rushed over and retrieved one, bringing it back. With a look at her mangled hand, he unscrewed the cap for her and held out the open bottle. She took it shakily. "They're all gone," she rasped, before taking a long swig. The mayor blinked at her a few times. "What do you mean, they're all gone?" he asked slowly. "What the fuck do you think I mean?" she snapped, voice rising in volume. "They're all gone. Chet, dead. Bo, dead. Zane, dead." Collier flinched at each of their names. "And Travis?" he asked quietly. She downed half of the bottle before shaking her head. "Hurt bad, but he might be alive," she said. "You just left him there?" the mayor demanded. She stared at the floor. "Those bikers took him," she said. There was a long, uncomfortable silence in the room as everybody tried to process what she'd just said. They did what?" the mayor gasped. "Are you sure?" She ground her teeth together and held up her hand. "Yeah, I'm sure. They took my finger, too," she said. "Or do you want to question me about whether or not that actually happened, too?" He struggled for words for a moment, taken aback, but scrubbed a hand down his face and nodded sheepishly. "I'm sorry. I'm just," he stammered, letting out a deep breath. "This town is all but defenseless now. Those boys were the best we had. If Apollo gets to those guns and ammo, he can wipe us out whenever he wants." "There's gotta be something we can do," Ethan protested. "Is there anybody out at the farms who can help?" Alonzo asked. "Even if it's risking someone with farming knowledge. Doesn't do as much good to be able to grow food if we aren't around to eat it." The mayor got to his feet, pacing back and forth, racking his brain for something useful. As he contemplated, the door opened, and it was a couple of older gentlemen flanking a woman in her 60s. She wore a lab coat and had graying blonde hair and a gentle smile. "I was told I had a patient," she called. Jackie raised her wounded hand. The doctor offered her a sympathetic gaze. "Guessing that's you, dear," she said, and sat down next to the punk rocker. "Don't worry, I'll get you patched up." "You need anything else, Mayor Collier?" one of the men asked politely. "Hang on, I think I do," the mayor said, and walked over to a nearby desk, grabbing a notepad and jotting down some information. He handed a note to each man, pointing to them as he spoke. "I need you to deliver this note to Wild Bill," he instructed.
He lives down there near the old high school."
"The ham radio guy?" the man asked.
"Yeah," the mayor replied with a nod. "He's got wires all over the place, so you can't miss him. I know he's been talking to people all over the place. Maybe we can get lucky and one of them can send us some help."
The man shook his head. "It's a long shot," he said, trailing off.
"But that's about all we have right now," the mayor finished, turning to the other man, who was already reading his note, which read simply, "Captain Ditko, Frakes Farm."
"You want me to take the truck or the horse?" the man asked.
"Truck," the mayor replied. "I know we don't have a lot of fuel to burn, at least non-airplane fuel, but I need him here now."
His subordinate nodded. "I'll be back in an hour or so," he promised. "I'll deliver this and get back on guard duty," the first one said.
"Please hurry," the mayor said.
The two men walked out, leaving the others to look at the still-standing man.
"So, who's Captain Ditko?" Ethan asked, opening a water bottle for himself.
The mayor rubbed the bridge of his nose.
"He ran the prison," he said.
"Okay," Alonzo prompted, waving a hand.
And I know what happened out there in the early days of this," the mayor said. "There may be some help in that prison."
Ethan's brow furrowed.
"Who?"
he asked.
"Axton," the mayor said,
tone almost regretful, as if he hated the idea as much as it came out of his mouth. There was a tense silence in the room, broken when Jackie hissed as the doctor finished up with the last of the bandage. She patted the younger woman's arm gently and turned to the mayor as she packed up her things.
"How is that possible?" the older woman asked. "I was told that everybody from the prison was evacuated. Captain Ditko told me personally." "Everybody that he felt comfortable letting free. The men who were in there on low-level warrants and the like," the mayor explained, sounding exhausted. "There were a few men, like Axton, who we absolutely didn't want to let loose on the population, especially with the chaos that was going on."
The doctor snapped her case shut with a frown and stood up to her full height, facing him with her chin raised.
"Mayor Correa, I was one of the last people out of that prison when it was evacuated," she said, tone icy. "I know what was happening in there, and I don't see how it was possible that anybody could have survived in there for even a few days, let alone going on 6 weeks. Well, Doc, I'll tell you the same story that Sheriff Chet told me," he said with a sigh. "If you still have questions, I'm sure Captain Ditko can fill in the blanks when he gets here."
Chapter 3. Day 0 + 2. The sun had gone down on the sleepy downtown area of Dalhart. There was chaos on the streets. Overturned cars, a wrecked one that had plowed right through the front of the 24-hour gym, and a dozen runners rampaging through the streets. Sheriff Chet was exhausted, as he'd been running since the first reported attack nearly 30 hours prior. He was ducked down in a small clothing store on Main Street, looking towards the 24-hour gym, which was kitty corner from him. Chet took out his flashlight, clicking it a few times in the direction of the gym. Several seconds later, a reciprocal beam of light came from the back. The car that had crashed destroyed the front, but for the moment it was holding back the runners on the street, most of which were focused on the restaurant at the end of the block where the door had broken in. Chet knew that meant that somebody, or most likely several somebodies, had lost their lives, but he still had work to do, and getting those people from the gym to safety, or relative safety, at any rate, was priority 1. He checked his sidearm, making sure it was topped off with a fresh mag. He had already burned through most of his ammo, but he still had 2 mags left. He steadied himself before carefully turning the locking mechanism on the door, doing it as gently as he could so it didn't make a loud thunking sound. With the door released, he pulled it carefully towards him, sticking his head partially out the door to look both ways. There were runners in the area, the closest one 30 yards in the opposite direction he needed to go. It was about 40 yards from his position to the car crash, which was going to be his point of entry. Run over to the car, get inside, and prepare to be followed, he thought to himself. You got this. There were half a dozen runners about 15 yards on the other side of the gym whose attention was away from him. He knew that as soon as he started to run, they'd be on him. So when he exited the building, he gently brought the door closed behind him before engaging in a brisk mall walk. Heel toe, he thought, chanting in his head, keeping the rhythm while minimizing the noise. This worked well enough to get him halfway across the street, but a safe passage wasn't meant to be. The zombie behind him turned and spotted him, letting out a growl as it started sprinting towards him. Chet heard the rapid footsteps and knew it was time to book it. He didn't bother firing back, just breaking into a sprint as well. The combined noise of the moaning and running drew the attention of the zombies on the other side of the wreck, all of which immediately growled and moaned, running towards him. Both Chet and the mini-mob were equal distance away from the car, about 15 yards, but after being engaged and fighting non-stop for the last day, Chet's muscles were angry and not cooperating. He knew he wasn't going to make it to the car before the creatures, so he prepared to fight. Within 5 yards of the car, 2 of the zombies came around the back end, the others a few yards behind. He knew it was risky, but he fired while running, hoping his aim was on target. He was relieved when one of his 3 rapid-fired shots hit the lead zombie in the head, dropping it. This gave him enough of an opening to lower his shoulder and slam into the other one, who was just behind, delivering a textbook open-field hit. The zombie was spun around in the air, with Chet having a good 40 pounds of muscle on it, slamming to the ground hard. He continued his momentum towards the car, leaping head-first onto the roof and sliding across it down onto the hood, finally rolling onto the ground inside the gym. He hit hard, quickly spinning around and aiming his gun back towards the mob. They were flailing about, trying to get in, but either weren't smart enough or coordinated enough to climb over the vehicle. A couple of them were smacking on the glass beside the crash, a self-contained pain of the safety stuff. He held his fire, but kept his gun aimed for several seconds before he was content that they were not coming in. At least, not yet. He pulled himself up off of the ground, greeted by a family of 4, the small children. "Sheriff, are you okay?" the man asked, reaching out to steady Chet with a shaky hand. "I'll manage," Chet replied with a sharp nod. "Is anybody else in here?" The man shook his head. "No, it's just us," he said. "How the hell?" Chet bit off his wordage when he glanced at the 2 young kids staring up at him with fearful wide eyes. How in the heck did you get in here? We cleared this place yesterday." The man pointed to the car, the front windshield shattered completely out. "We live a few blocks from here," he explained, "and our front door gave way a couple of hours ago. It was all we could do just to get to the garage and into the car. We didn't know where we were going, just that we had to get out of town." He took a breath, closing his eyes briefly and steadying himself before continuing. "There were so many of those things on the road. One of them smashed into our windshield, breaking it. I lost control and crashed. I don't know why they didn't follow us in here, but they didn't. We climbed through the front and have been hiding here ever since." Chet nodded, raising his hands. "Okay, rapid-fire question time," he said firmly. "Just yes or no answers. Is anybody hurt?" They all said no, except for the smallest girl who pointed to a small cut on her arm with an exaggerated pout. "Okay," Chet continued. "Can everybody run?" A chorus of yes all around. "Have you seen anybody else in the last couple of hours?" the sheriff asked. "Yes," the man said, and didn't elaborate until Chet waved his hand impatiently for more information. "Sorry, there were 2 people who ran by an hour or so ago. I think they went into the restaurant." Chet sighed. The restaurant was overrun with those things. "Are you going to save them too?" the little girl asked, voice so small it hurt. All he could do was lie to her through his teeth. There was no time to be delicate. "Yes, I will save them too," he said. "But first, I'm going to save you." He pulled out his radio. "This is Sheriff Chet. I am in the downtown gym and need immediate assistance. Anybody copy?" There were a few moments of static before somebody came on the line.
Don't tell me I gotta save your ass again, brother, Travis drawled. Not me, Chet said firmly. Got a family, and a couple small girls, too. Travis made a choked noise, knowing he screwed up with his language. Well, I'm down on Den Rock, so I'll be there to save your behind in just a minute, he said. What's it looking like down there? Downtown's got a small crowd, Chet said. 10, maybe 12 of those things? I got Bo in the back of the truck, Travis replied. I'll let him know what's up. You just be ready to move, because these things are everywhere. Once he starts shooting. It'll be like sending up a flare, Chet replied. Got it. We'll be ready. The radio went silent, and the sheriff put it back on his belt. Okay, I need you four to listen up. When they get here, it's going to be very loud and very frantic. But when I give the signal, you need to follow me. Do not hesitate, or it could get bad. He looked directly at the father of the family. Do you understand what I'm saying? The man tensed at the implication, but nodded jerkily. Chet gave him a small pat on the shoulder to reassure him. Okay, they're just a few blocks away, he said. Be ready. The group stayed ducked down behind the counter, waiting for reinforcements to come in. Within seconds, a truck's roar echoed as it raced towards them. A moment later, the tires screeched as the vehicle came to a swift stop just in front of the gym. Bo opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle, putting round after round into the zombies, some of which were finding the head and delivering kill shots. As he was doing this, Chet gave the signal. Let's move, he cried, and led the family out, the girls crying from the noise as their parents carried them. Chet kept his handgun ready as he ran for the door, flicking the lock open. He looked outside, seeing only a couple more zombies were left standing, both of which were running to the truck as Bo reloaded. Chet didn't wait, busting through the door, walking deliberately towards the truck, which was about 10 yards away, aiming carefully before pulling the trigger twice. Within seconds, both creatures were on the ground, and Bo was a little agitated, as he was nearly in the line of fire. "Damn, Sheriff, you trying to get me killed?" he asked. "Not today," Chet quipped, leading the family over to the truck and helping them into the back. Bo pulled them up as Travis hung his head out the window. "You heard from Captain Ditko?" he asked. Chet shook his head. "Not in a few hours," he said. "Get in," Travis instructed, and the sheriff complied. Travis handed over the walkie-talkie in his hand as Chet shut the door, taking it and raising it to his lips. "This is Sheriff Chet," he said. Before anything came through, Bo smacked the hood of the cab. "They're in," he barked. "Get a move on! More of those things are coming!" Travis hit the gas, and they sped off to a safer area of town. The road still had dozens of those things, all of which immediately headed in their direction as the engine roared. "It's about damn time, Sheriff," Captain Ditko came back. "We got a situation up here at the prison that could really use your attention." Chet grunted. "We've been dealing with our own situation here in town, Ditko," he said. "Now, what's going on?" "I need you here now," the captain replied, tone deadly serious. Chet took a deep breath. "We'll be there in 5, he promised. "Where are you?" "From reception area," Ditko replied. "That's where all the safe people are." Chet knew that phrasing wasn't ideal. He glanced at Travis, giving him a nod as if to spur him on to get to the prison. "We're on the way," he said. "Out." They sped down the road, finally making it outside of the small downtown area and out into the countryside. It was only a few miles to the prison, which was just outside of town. "That didn't sound good," Travis said. "No, it did not," Chet agreed. "If you want backup," his brother began. Chet shook his head. "I'll handle whatever Ditko needs," he promised. "You and Bo get those people to one of the safe zones, then keep clearing out the town. We're isolated out here, so if we can clear it—" He shook his head. "Then we might have a chance of surviving this," Travis finished. "Or at least give us a chance to prepare for the next wave," Chet muttered. As they drove up towards the prison, they could see it was lit up like it would have been if someone were trying to escape. The facility was huge, holding up to 500 prisoners ranging from low-level offenders all the way up to murderers. In the right circumstances, it could be a fortress.
Of course, if there was an outbreak inside, though, it would be the most dangerous place in town. Travis pulled up towards the employee parking lot, and it was a madhouse. At first he panicked, thinking it was overrun with zombies, but was quickly relieved to see that it was just people. However, he noticed something peculiar. "What the hell?" he breathed. Chet squinted, finding the same thing, that it wasn't just prison personnel that were evacuating, but prisoners too. "Just let me out here," he instructed. "I can help," Travis insisted. "Get these people to safety and keep clearing them down," the sheriff demanded, tone forceful. "I got this." His brother nodded begrudgingly as Chet got out. Bo looked down from the back. "Looks like you're walking into a shit show there, Sheriff," he drawled. Chet gave him the stink eye, inclining his head to the small girls sitting with their family. "Oh, they're fine," Bo scoffed. "If a couple of curse words are the worst thing they experienced this week, they're doing better than the rest of us." Chet shook his head at the attitude, smacking the side of the truck to get Travis moving. As he drove off, the sheriff looked around the parking lot. There were people all over in their cars, but nobody was moving. Mary rushed up to him, an office worker in her 50s, her dark hair askew. "Oh, Sheriff, are you ever a sight for sore eyes?" she said breathlessly. "What is going on here?" Chet asked, waving a hand around. "There was a breach and," she huffed, clearly rattled. "Captain Ditko ordered everybody out." The sheriff motioned to some prisoners who were getting into vehicles along with prison personnel. "You weren't kidding with the everybody," he said. "Don't worry, it's just low-level people," Mary assured him. "People passing hot checks, pot, stuff like that." "Where are you going?" Chet asked. She chewed her lip. I don't know," she admitted. "Captain just said to get people out, but he didn't say to where." "Well, don't go into town," Chet warned. "It's all kinds of dangerous. Almost didn't get out of there myself. Wait, you've been around Dalhart for a while, haven't you?" "Born and raised," she replied. Chet jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "Do you know where Freke's farm is?" he asked. "Yeah, I do," she replied with a nod. "Get a caravan down there," he instructed. Her brow furrowed. "Won't Mr. Frakes be mad?" she asked. Chet shook his head. "He took a group of survivors down there earlier," he explained. "Said if we needed to, we could send more people there." "Hope he's okay with prisoners," she murmured, worried. "I think at this point, as long as they're not actively trying to eat him, he'll be fine," Chet said. She feigned a smile at the forced joke before nodding and turning back to the group to make the announcement. "Captain Ditko is in the receiving area," she said over her shoulder before she left. Chet nodded and went inside. As he entered the front receiving area, he spotted the captain standing there loading a shotgun. There were 2 other shotguns on the table in front of him, presumably all loaded. While he was the only one in the room, the noise was frantic and loud, with excessive banging on the doorway that led into the prison. "Captain Ditko," Chet greeted. "About time, Sheriff," the captain grunted and peered past him. "Is it just you? Where's your posse?" "They're still clearing out downtown and pulling people out," Chet explained. "That's what I was doing when you called." "Well, I hope you're ready for a fight, because we have a big one on our hands," Ditko said. "People still inside?" Chet asked, inclining his head. Ditko nodded. 2 of my men in the control room got stuck, he explained. "If it wasn't for them opening and closing doors, some of us wouldn't be here right now, myself included. I'll be damned if I'm going to leave them behind." "How bad is it in there?" Chet asked. The captain pursed his lips for a moment. "We had a massive outbreak in the mess hall and the med bay, spread from there," he replied. "Couple hundred or so of those things got loose and started wreaking havoc. I thought we had it contained, but one panicked guard managed to get a door open, and the floor came with him." "How many between us and the control room?" Chet asked. Ditko shook his head. "Don't know. Lost contact with them an hour ago," he said. "I know they're locked up tight, and they know I wouldn't leave them behind, so they're still there. We just have to get to them." Chet picked up one of the shotguns and nodded. "Okay, lead the way, Captain," he said. Ditko slung one of the guns over his shoulder while readying the other one, leading them over to the door where all the banging was. He motioned for the sheriff to get into position and block the door with his foot after it opened a couple of feet. "You might want to cover your ear," Ditko suggested, wiggling his gun. "This is going to be loud." Chet nodded, putting his hand over his ear, facing the gun, bracing himself for what was sure to be a strong push. The captain nodded to make sure he was ready and swiped his badge across the lock. Immediately after the door unlatched, it flung open, crashing into Chet and pushing him back. Ditko didn't waste any time unloading his shotgun at head level, and the sheriff watched as he pumped round after round after round through the opening. He wasn't sure if Ditko was even bothering to aim, or if he was just throwing as much shrapnel downrange as he possibly could. He hoped it wasn't the latter, however, because it would mean that the hallway was jam-packed with ghouls, something he didn't really want to face off with. After several rapid-fire shotgun blasts, he stopped firing, quickly reloading the gun. As he did, Chet noticed that the door didn't have the pressure on it that it had before, so he let up. "Don't get comfy yet, Sheriff," the captain said gruffly. Chet got back into position, bracing himself against the door as Ditko aimed the shotgun down the hallway. He took careful aim before pulling the trigger this time, immediately dropping the shotgun to his side. "Had a straggler that couldn't get through the mass of bodies," Ditko explained. "We're clear now." Chet let up on the door, and Ditko pushed it all the way open. The sheriff looked down the hallway, his eyes widening at the carnage. There were a dozen corpses, most of which were missing their heads and portions of their torsos. It was a mixture of guards and prisoners, all laying in a pile of crimson goo on the floor. "Looks like you did some damage there, Captain," Chet murmured. "Slugs at point-blank range are no joke," Ditko quipped, and waved as he walked down the hall. "Come on, we're just getting started." Chet nodded, and they both readied their shotguns as they walked down a long hallway. The door at the far end of it was slightly ajar, but opened away from them into another hallway. They carefully stepped over the corpses while keeping an eye on the offices that lined the hallway, making sure they weren't going to get any of the surprises. Chet was startled when a zombie smacked into the glass, clamoring for him. He shook his head at his reaction, prompting a smirk from Ditko. "You good there, Sheriff?" he asked, a teasing note in his voice. Chet sniffed. "Yeah, just wasn't expecting it," he said firmly. "Keep it moving," Ditko said. Chet nodded, and the two of them made it to the next door, listening carefully to the noise outside of it. There were lots of moans and growls, as well as a large amount of frantic banging on glass and metal. Ditko peered out into the large room, finding the issue. It was a low-level prisoner processing area, with the control room in the middle. There were about 15 zombies in the room, all of which were trying to get into the glass enclosure in the center. "Flashlight," Ditko asked, holding out his hand. Chet nodded and handed his over, and the captain signaled the control room. If there wasn't anybody left alive in there, then there was no point in risking their lives. A moment later, one of the men inside stood up on a chair so he could be seen above the mob, waving to the captain. Ditko gave him some hand signals, telling them to make as much of a commotion inside as they could. The guard understood and got his companion to join in, both men yelling and smacking on the glass, trying their best to keep the zombies focused on them. Ditko looked around the room for cover, knowing as soon as they started shooting that the zombies would all come for them. In the far corner of the room, he found that someone had turned over a couple of the metal meeting tables to form a makeshift barricade. There was also a pool of blood at the base of it, proving that it wasn't a very good long-term solution. "See those tables over there?" Ditko asked. Chet's brow furrowed. "Yeah?" he asked dryly. "That's our play," the captain said. "Not a lot of cover," Chet warned. "Doesn't need to last long, just long enough for us to do what we need to do," Ditko replied. "Is there any other way for those things to get in there?" Chet asked, cocking a brow. "We can handle this group, but not much more than that." "They got this area on lockdown," Ditko said, pointing to the bright red lights above the main door. "Those doors are sealed tight. Nothing's getting in or out." Chet took a deep breath. "Okay, how do you want to play it?" he asked. We move silent and hope we can get to cover before they notice us, Ditko said.
The sheriff nearly face-palmed. And if they notice us? He asked.
Run like hell and start shooting, Ditko said with a wild grin.
Well, I guess that qualifies as a plan, Chet muttered. The captain smacked him on the shoulder.
You ready? He asked.
Chet nodded and the two men quietly snuck into the room, moving to the back wall as quickly as they could. Both aimed their shotguns towards the distracted mob, just in case. They made it most of the way to the barricade before one of the ghouls noticed them. It turned and let out a screech before breaking away from the control room and rushing towards them. None of the other zombies followed suit, so Chet tossed the shotgun over to Ditko, quickly pulling out his knife in the process. The creature ran hard towards his fresh meal, but Chet sidestepped it, grabbing it by the back of the shirt collar and slamming it head first into the wall. He wasted no time in jamming the blade into the base of the skull, ending its life. He gently set it on the ground while retaking possession of his shotgun, as Ditko gave him a nod of approval. The two of them got into position, moving the table into the corner and giving them as much cover as possible.
"Is that glass bulletproof?" Chet asked.
Ditko nodded.
"Bulletproof, shatterproof. You'd need some explosives to get in there," he said.
"Glad y'all didn't skimp on the essentials," the sheriff said.
"Nothing but the best for my boys," Ditko declared,
and the duo aimed their shotguns towards the control room and the zombies surrounding it, which was about 25 yards.
"I'm going to take a shot, and you wait until they're closer. You have slugs too, so try and line up your shots once they're on us. With any luck, we can take them down and not have to reload."
Chet nodded, readying his position.
"Here we go," Ditko said, taking aim.
He fired, ripping a hole in the back of one of the zombies. In unison, the creatures turned their attention away from the control room and towards the two men in the corner. The screeches were deafening, quickly followed by a thunderous round of footsteps. As they made it within 5 yards, Ditko gave the signal.
"Hit 'em!"
he bellowed. Both men fired their shotguns at the same time, ripping through the heads of the first few zombies rushing towards them. As they fell, others pushed through their falling corpses like they weren't even there, pursuing their fresh prey. Both men racked in another shell, with Ditko immediately firing but Chet carefully aiming, trying to get a 2-for-1. His slug ripped through the head of the target zombie, but just winged the one behind it. Before they could rack another shell, the ghouls were onto them, crashing hard into the table, which shoved against the corner. The two men backed up as far as they could, barely out of arm's reach, quickly aiming their next shot before pulling the trigger. The close range resulted in a bloody mess, as the slug didn't just pierce through the heads of the zombies, but completely exploded them. With so many of the creatures pressed up against the makeshift barricade, they didn't take the time to carefully aim, just pumping the gun and firing it in rhythm. The zombies continued to fall, one after another, and Chet's gun clicked empty.
"I'm out,"
he cried. Ditko leaned over, extending his arm so Chet could get the other shotgun that was on his shoulder. He quickly grabbed it as the ghouls gave another massive push, and one of them flipped over the table onto the floor at their feet. Ditko didn't waste any time, firing into the crowd, pumping another shell into the chamber, and putting the barrel at the base of the fallen zombie's skull. The blood splatter flew upwards with such velocity that it hit the ceiling. The battle continued in its intensity as both men fired several more shells, eventually taking out the crowd of zombies. As the moans fell silent, they stood there, breathing heavily, before exchanging a nod.
"That was fun,"
Chet huffed.
"Not done yet," Ditko replied. "Check the fallen, and make sure nothing is still moving."
The sheriff nodded as they came out from behind cover, moving slowly through the crowd of ground-up flesh, ripped up from the slugs. They kicked a few of the corpses that didn't look like they were missing enough of their heads, but to their relief, none of them moved.
"Let's see how my boys are doing,"
Ditko said, and led Chet to the control room, which was being unlocked from the inside. The two guards emerged, looking a combination of terrified and relieved.
"You boys all right?"
the captain asked.
"Little dehydrated, but we'll live,"
one of them said with a shaky smile.
"Let's get you out of here then," Ditko said.
"There's something you need to see first, Captain,"
the second guard piped up and led them into the control room.
There was a wall of monitors along one wall, showing the entirety of the prison. Most of them were empty, with remnants of battles long over. The mess hall was a bloodbath, with 60 to 70 zombies in there alone. "What am I looking at?" Ditko asked. The guard found the correct monitor before pointing to it. It showed a small room that was near the mess hall, and there were 4 or 5 zombies outside trying to get in. "Is somebody still alive in there?" Chet asked. The guard nodded, punching up a few buttons and switching the angle to inside the small office. There were 5 men inside, all prisoners. Ditko leaned forward, scrutinizing the monitor, looking closely to try to get a sense of who it was. When he realized, his eyes widened and he backed up. "Is that who I think it is?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the guard replied gravely. "That's Axton, with an assortment of other lowlifes." "Why are you showing us this exactly?" Chet asked, raising a hand. "Seems like a situation that's not much of a problem." Both guards gaped at him and Ditko crossed his arms, leveling a harsh glare at the callousness. "What?" Chet asked, shrugging. "He's a violent criminal, and most likely a murderer if the evidence is to be believed. He's terrorized this region for years with his gang. If you ask me, he's getting exactly what he deserves." "Be that as it may," the captain replied firmly, "I'm not going to live out my days knowing I condemned 5 men to death by starvation or worse." Chet growled. "If you think I'm going to risk my life for that—" He bit off what he had been about to say, taking a deep breath to compose himself. "You know his gang killed one of my friends in Dumas, don't you? Cop buddy mine, trying to break up one of their bar fights, got stabbed in the gut, ripped up some of his vital organs. 12 hours in surgery, a hell of a lot of pain, but didn't make it." "I know you're not a fan of his," Ditko said, raising his hands, "but that doesn't change my decision." Chet inhaled sharply through his nose. "Well, you can go get him on your own," he snapped. "I understand," Ditko replied. Chet crossed his arms. "Besides, if you do get him, what the hell are you going to do with him?" he demanded. "Set him loose?" "We can lock him up in the county jail once we get it clear, of course," the captain replied flippantly. "I have no intention of letting him go, but I'll be damned if I'm killing a man who hasn't been convicted yet." "Captain," one of the guards cut in, "I don't think anybody has to go get him." Both men turned towards the 2 guards. "Explain," Ditko said, cocking a brow. The guard pulled up a map of the facility, pointing to where they were and tracing along the map as he spoke. "They're here, in one of the offices," he explained. "The mess hall is across from them, but nobody's getting in there. However, if they go this route, they can go through the kitchen staff entrance and get to the food storage area." Ditko and Chet studied the map, nodding at the same time. "Is the way clear?" the captain asked. One of the guards pulled up the route, showing that there were several zombies in the kitchen, which they'd have to go through. "Not clear," he said slowly, "but if those guys are as violent as you say they are, they should be able to get through." "Is the storage room secure?" Chet asked. The guard nodded. "It should be," he said. "It's storage and basic prep, so they'll have access to running water." "How much food's in there?" Ditko asked. "Just got a shipment 3 days ago, so enough to cover the entire prison population for a couple of weeks," the guard replied. The captain nodded slowly. "That should keep 'em fed until we can get a handle on things," he mused, and turned to Chet. "Is that satisfactory to you, Sheriff?" "As long as they do it themselves, I can live with it," Chet replied. "Basically lets us punt on what to do with them until we can deal with the rest of this." "Good," Ditko said, and inclined his head towards one of the guards. "Can you get me a line into that room?" He looked at the control panel and ran a finger down the cheat sheet of extensions, punching up the phone and dialing the room, setting it to speaker. They watched on the monitor as the men inside jumped at the sudden noise. Axton picked up the ringing phone and brought it to his ear. "Hello?" he asked. "Who am I speaking to?" the captain asked. "This is Axton, leader of the Knights of Dumas," the prisoner declared, tone snotty. "Who the hell is this?" "Captain Ditko," came the easy reply. "I'm in charge of this facility." Axton laughed. "Well, Captain, I must say you're doing a bang-up job of running this place," he drawled.
Don't suppose you could get this place under control so my friends and I can go back to leisurely awaiting our court dates?
Afraid I can't do that, Ditko said. Things are a little chaotic out here.
I kind of gathered that from whatever those things are, trying to come in and rip our throats out with their teeth,
came the reply, as calm as if he were discussing the weather. It's not just happening here, it's happening all over town, the captain explained. Most likely everywhere.
So, is this our official pardon call?
Axton asked, unable to contain the excitement in his voice. Ditko took a deep breath. Not exactly, he said slowly. This is the I don't feel right leaving you to starve to death, so I'm giving you a chance to survive call.
Well, Captain, I do appreciate the consideration, Axton drawled. So, what can we do to help the rescue party?
The captain shook his head. Afraid there's not a rescue party coming, he said.
Unless they invented teleportation technology within the last 48 hours or so. I'm a little confused as to how you're going to be getting us enough food to ride this out,
Axton said, his posture stiffening. You're close to the food storage area, Ditko explained. If you listen to me and do what I say, I can help you get to it. There's enough food and security there that you'll be safe until we get a handle on things.
Not sure if you've taken the time to look at the condition of your prison, Captain, but the mess hall isn't exactly what I would call a safe zone at the moment,
Axton scoffed.
As a matter of fact, we barely escaped it to get here.
Well, the good news is that you don't have to go through the mess hall, Captain Ditko said. The bad news is you do have to go through the kitchen, which is attached to the mess hall. So I hope you boys are ready to fight.
Well, if we weren't ready to fight, we wouldn't be in here in the first place now, would we?
Axton drawled. The captain chuckled. No, I don't suppose you would be, he agreed.
All right. It appears this is the only offer on the table, so walk us through it,
Axton said, rolling his shoulders.
How are we getting out of this room and to where we need to be?
You're going to have to find something in there to help you break through the mob by the door, Ditko explained. There's no more than 5 or 6 of those things outside, with the rest of the hallway clear. He motioned to the others to start finding weapons. They quickly ripped the room apart, flipping a metal desk over and using some makeshift tools to unscrew the legs, giving them some bludgeons.
Okay, we can manage that, Axton said. What next?
Hang a right and go to the end of the hall, Ditko instructed. Last door on the left is the kitchen staff entrance. When you're there, we'll buzz you in from here. Now, there's a few of those things in the kitchen, and a whole hell of a lot more just on the other side of the serving line. So you'll have to move quickly and quietly if you want to make it. Axton nodded.
Where's the door we need to get to?
He asked. Far end of the kitchen, the captain replied. When you get close, we'll buzz you in and lock it up tight once you're inside. Axton glanced over at his makeshift army, their desk legs in hand, nodding that they were ready to go.
Okay, Captain, we're on the move, he said. You just be ready to open those doors for us.
We will be, Ditko promised. Good luck. Axton looked directly into the camera and nodded as he hung up the phone and grabbed the rolling desk chair, pushing it to the front of the line, just out of reach of the door that would swing open. The group inside the control room watched on the monitor, but they couldn't hear anything. Axton appeared to be barking out orders as the men got into position. They didn't hesitate once they were ready, with one prisoner opening up the door and Axton shoving the chair out through the crowd. They switched camera angles to the hallway and watched in amazement as the group made short work of the zombies, beating them savagely. I can see why they were locked up, Chet muttered under his breath. And you can see why we were having hiring issues out here, Ditko said, waving a hand towards the monitors. Nobody wants to work with guys who can end you in a blink of an eye, especially for what we pay. The 5 prisoners ran down the hallway towards the kitchen entrance, with Axton waving to them that they were ready for the door to be opened. Open the door, and be ready to open the storage door when they get close, the captain instructed. The guard nodded, hitting the correct button to unlock the kitchen door. As soon as the light above it changed, Axton flung open the door and rushed in without a weapon, leading the charge. They watched as he made it to the kitchen, delivering a forceful front kick to the first zombie he came across. He grabbed one of the large metal pots and used it to cave the creature's head in.
"So much for the quiet approach,"
Chet murmured. They checked the mess hall monitor, finding the majority of the zombies inside responding to the noise in the kitchen.
"They're not going to make it," the guard said.
Ditko reached down onto the console and hit a big red button, which turned on the sirens. The sound was deafening, even in the control room. On the monitor, the zombies in the mess hall went crazy, looking around all confused and whipping to various corners of the room where the speakers were.
"That ought to buy them a minute,"
Ditko said. On the kitchen cam, the prisoners made short work of the zombies and quickly ran to the storage room door.
"Hit it,"
the captain said. The guard opened up the door for them, and the 5 rushed inside, slamming it shut behind them. The guard locked the door and Ditko turned off the alarm.
"Give me the phone in that room,"
he said, snapping his fingers. The guard dialed up the storage room, and as soon as there was the click of an answer, Ditko leaned over the console.
"Your boys okay?"
he asked.
"Little bloody, but none of it's ours, so I think we'll be all right,"
Axton replied, only slightly out of breath. The captain nodded.
"That's good to hear,"
he said.
"Do I have you to thank for that alarm?"
Axton asked.
"The ghouls in the mess hall were getting a little too riled up for my liking,"
Ditko explained as the guard pulled up the camera in the storage room.
"Figured you could use an assist."
"Appreciate that, Captain,"
Axton said as his men looked through the food, high-fiving and happy to have as much food as they wanted.
"Looks like we're going to be just fine in here. I do have to ask, though, any idea how long we might be stuck for?"
Ditko sighed.
"I wish I had something definitive to tell you,"
he said.
"We still don't even have a firm grasp on what's happening. As soon as I know something, you'll know."
"I can live with that, Captain,"
Axton said.
"For what it's worth, I owe you one. You could have let us starve, and I'm almost positive you had people in your ear telling you the same thing. But you didn't."
Ditko had enough grace not to turn his eyes on one of the people who had, in fact, told him that.
"It's my job to keep you boys safe until the state comes and gets you," he said. "Not my job to pass judgment or punishment."
"A man truly dedicated to his job,"
Axton said.
"I can appreciate that."
"You get comfortable," the captain said. "I'll be in touch."
"Good luck out there,"
Axton said. Ditko flipped off the mic, staring at the monitor. Axton gazed into the camera as he slowly hung up the phone, his eyes a mixture of gratitude and warning, as if he were reminding them not to forget about them in there. The captain finally tore his eyes away, turning to his men.
"Is there anybody else in here that's still alive?"
he asked. One of the guards shook his head.
"None that we've been able to find," he said. "And we've been looking ever since we got stuck in here," the other guard added. "Not like we had anything else to do."
"Okay. I want you to make sure the emergency power is set up," Ditko instructed. "Minimal power, minimal lights. Shut everything non-essential down. I want the main locks engaged and ventilation and climate control to the storage room. Emergency lighting, too. If this, whatever this is, stretches on for weeks, I don't want to come back and find this facility out of juice."
"I thought we had renewable power generators up here,"
Chet asked, brow furrowing. The captain nodded.
"We do," he said. "But it's meant to be a stopgap, not run the facility indefinitely."
"Need just a few minutes, Captain, and we'll be ready to go," one of the guards said.
Ditko nodded.
"We'll be in the front waiting room,"
he said, and led Chet out of the room, back towards the entrance. They stayed stiff and on guard until they made it back, finding the front door still latched. Chet drew his walkie-talkie, bringing it to his lips.
"Travis, what's your 20?"
he asked. Several seconds later, his brother crackled in.
"Just leaving the school now," he said. "Headed towards the grocery store."
Chet glanced at Ditko.
"Mind giving me a ride into town?" he asked.
The captain nodded.
"Yeah, I can do that after I lock up here," he said.
Chet turned back to the radio.
"We'll be there in 10, he said.
"Copy that," Travis replied, and the radio went dead.
"Captain,"
Chet said slowly,
I want to apologize if I was out of line back there."
He took a deep breath.
"I have some strong feelings about Axton, and you don't have to apologize,"
Ditko cut in, waving him off.
"Been a hell of a day. Filters have kind of gone by the wayside."
"That they have," Chet agreed with a soft chuckle. "I do want to say that I admire your resolve, though. Not sure I would have had the intestinal fortitude to save that man's life."
"Sheriff, sometimes you gotta do the right thing if you want to live with yourself," the captain said. "And today, that meant I had to help save a man who has probably murdered several people."
He straightened his shoulders.
"I'm not going to let a little apocalypse change who I am."
Chapter 4. Day 0 plus 43.
"Are you out of your goddamned mind, Mayor?"
Captain Ditko yelled.
"You want to let that psycho out of his cage to roam free? Did you hit the liquor store before you called me all the way up here, or did you find the key to the police evidence locker?"
The mayor raised his palms in surrender. "Captain, I know it's a risky play, but—"
"No. Dipping your nuts in rubbing alcohol and setting them on fire is a risky play,"
Ditko snapped.
"This is just straight-up suicide."
Ethan raised his hands slowly. "But didn't you go out of your way to save this guy's life?" he asked, immediately withering as the captain turned a glare of daggers on him. Ditko turned on him like a snake, stalking up until they were almost nose to nose.
"I don't know who you are, but I'm going to give you a valuable life lesson, son,"
he said, voice low and menacing.
"There's a goddamn Grand Canyon-sized pile of things I can do that fit between saving a man's life and setting a maniac murderer free. Just because I do one does not mean I'm obligated to do the other. And hell, that's the only one I'm 100% sure on who's stuck in that room. We had a high-level prisoner transfer a few days before this went down, so lots of new faces in there that I have no clue about. Freeing Axton means we free them too, so you ready to set loose 5 potential mass murderers?"
He whirled, facing Alonzo.
"Are you?"
Then to the mayor.
"Are you?"
Next Jackie.
"Are you?"
She jutted out her chin. "Yes, I am," she said firmly. The others, Ditko included, blinked at her, seemingly in shock at her words. She got up, holding up her injured hand. "They took my finger and I got off easy," she said. "I watched Apollo shoot Bo in the head. I watched them feed Zane to those things. I watched Apollo order his men to cave in Chet's skull with their boots. More importantly, I also watched them carry Travis off back to whatever clubhouse they have." She knew she was embellishing a little, but she had to make her point. "I know I'm the new girl around here, and I'm well aware that I am totally in the dark about what Axton is potentially capable of. But I've seen, up close and personal, what Apollo is capable and willing to do. And right now, he has Travis." She waved an arm. "Look around this room, Captain. Do you see a fighting force that can get him back? Do you?" Ditko followed her directions, glancing around the motley crew before shaking his head. "Whether you like it or not, we're at war," Jackie said. "And if we're going to make it through, we need warriors. I don't know about you, but having a few murderers set off against them might just be our only option." He ground his teeth, crossing his arms as he thought hard for a few moments. He shook his head, as if debating with himself. "You did save his life, didn't you?" Alonzo finally asked. Ditko nodded. "I did," he said. "Then use that," Alonzo suggested. Maybe you can strike a deal with him." The captain snorted.
"You assume he's trustworthy," he said.
"Oh, hell no," Alonzo replied with a humorless laugh. "I know he's not trustworthy. He sounds like he's dangerous as hell, which is why you give him an offer he can't refuse."
"Which is?" Ditko asked, cocking his head.
"Offer his gang food," Jackie said. The mayor slapped his hands down on his desk. "You want to give that gang that killed our friends and neighbors food? Out of the question," he cried shrilly. Jackie pointed at him, fire in her gaze.
Interrupt me again, and you'll see I'm just as dangerous with 9 fingers as I am with 10, she warned. The mayor's breath caught in his throat and he stepped back, snapping his mouth shut. But yes, we give them food, she continued. They may be badass bikers, but they need to eat just like anybody else. My guess is that they've been living off of whatever canned goods they've been able to find in Dumas. That's not a source that's going to last forever. Outside of food delivery, they leave the town alone. We're safe. Travis comes home. Axton gets his gang back along with food. It's wins all around.
Ditko and the mayor exchanged a concerned look for a few long moments, as if they were silently debating with their eyes.
Captain, do you see any other options? The mayor finally asked. Do we have the guns and manpower to take on those bikers?
Ditko sighed, suddenly looking exhausted. Maybe. I don't know, he said.
Do you have the men to take down the bikers if they get to the gun store in Dumas? Jackie asked.
The captain's eyes grew round. What? He blurted. I thought Mr. Connor would have cleared that place out and bolted.
I was with him a couple days ago, Jackie explained. He was headed back to the store before leaving town. The zombie situation in Dumas means he probably wasn't successful, so there's a huge cache of guns and ammo ripe for the taking.
Ditko rubbed his forehead with a sigh. Jesus, he said. No, if they get those, then there's no way we're going to be able to take them down. Hell, there's no way we'd be able to hold the town. He glanced at her. You're probably the toughest person left here in town, and no offense, but that doesn't exactly bode well for our chances.
She smirked, holding up her injured hand. I'm as confident as they come, but I wouldn't be betting on us, she agreed.
Ditko agonized over it for a few more moments before nodding. Okay, but it's not going to be that easy, he said. The prison is filled with those things, and while I'm pretty sure we can contain most of them, we're still going to have to fight our way to Axton and the others.
Alonzo and I can help out, Jackie offered.
The man in question put a hand to his chest in faux offense.
What have I told you about volunteering me for dangerous shit? He gasped. She rolled her eyes playfully. Don't get your panties in a bunch. I'll protect you, she promised with a wink.
What about me? Ethan asked.
She tilted her head back and forth. You're not much of a fighter, she said slowly. He shrugged. Doesn't look like there's many other options, he said.
He's right, Ditko cut in. This is an all-hands-on-deck thing, and we're all the hands.
I'll come too, the doctor said, raising her hand. The captain gaped at her, shaking his head and opening his mouth to argue, but she interrupted quickly. Don't worry, I'm not fighting, she said. But you have 5 men who have been living off of canned goods for the last 6 weeks. They're going to need a proper checkup.
Ditko stared at her firmly. Okay, but you do what I say when I say it, understood? He asked.
Wouldn't have it any other way, she agreed.
I'll have the horses prepped and provisions gathered, the mayor said. I don't want to leave Travis in their hands any longer than absolutely necessary.
Ditko nodded, waving his hands at the others.
All right, saddle up, he barked. Let's go break into a prison.
Chapter 5. Ditko drove the group to the prison, the mood in the SUV somber and tense. None of them relished the idea of going toe-to-toe with a mob of ghouls, and even if things went perfectly, they'd then be standing toe-to-toe with a bunch of murderers. Nobody spoke as they drove, sitting in tense silence. Finally, the captain pulled into the parking lot where all was quiet. There were no vehicles, no bodies, no nothing. It was just abandoned. He put the SUV in park and shut it off, turning to address his haphazard crew.
Everybody listen good, he said firmly. Inside that building, I'm the boss. You do what I say when I say it. If you do, you'll make it out in one piece. Any objection to that?
Everyone shook their heads. He nodded.
Okay, get your gear,
he said, and got out of the vehicle. Everyone grabbed metal baseball bats and a handgun, and Ditko led the way towards the building. everyone else trailing behind. They entered the front reception area, and it was pretty much exactly how it had been left the last time he was there. If they hadn't known any better, it almost didn't look like there was an apocalypse going on outside. The captain led them to the reception office, which was in a small room off to the side. He looked in through the glass, confirming that it was still empty. He opened the door and motioned for the doctor to go inside. "You stay here until we need you," he said. She hesitated. "But—" "What did I say in the car?" he snapped. She nodded and entered the office. "You lock it and don't come out until I get you," Ditko instructed.
"Can you at least toss me a magazine?" the doctor asked.
Ethan walked over to the front area, grabbing a handful of magazines and holding them out.
"Sorry they don't look recent," he said. "Recent enough, dear," the doctor said with a knowing smile, and he flushed at the realization that there wouldn't be any current magazines with the state of the world.
"Okay, this front section should be clear all the way to the control room," the captain said as the doctor locked the door behind her. "Unless the power has failed at some point in the last 6 weeks, in which case, get ready to run."
Ethan's brow furrowed.
"To where?"
he asked.
"Anywhere but here,"
Jackie quipped.
"What she said,"
Ditko agreed.
"Come on."
He led them to the door, opening it up carefully to reveal the very rotten corpses of the zombies he had shotgun blasted so long ago. The stench was overwhelming. That many dead bodies in a single unventilated room, and everyone stifled gags as they moved slowly up the hallway. Ditko had his gun at the ready, the others firmly gripping their bats, and they made their way to the processing area where the control room was. The captain peeked out from the door, spotting a few zombies in the room, and shut the door quietly as he retreated.
"Damn it,"
he muttered. Alonzo shook his head.
"Don't you go doing that now,"
he scolded. "That's not what I want to hear from you."
"At some point the emergency power failed,"
Ditko explained.
"Some of the doors were opened. Those things could be anywhere."
Jackie shook her head.
"How many are there?"
she asked.
"Only looked like 2 or 3, Ditko said. "The emergency lights are on, so it's not that bright in there."
"Is the path to the control room clear?" she asked.
The captain shrugged.
"If we get past them, yeah," he said.
"I have an idea,"
Jackie said. He nodded, whirling his hand in the air impatiently.
"Okay, let's hear it,"
he urged. She blinked at him, surprised that he was open to her idea, given how intense he'd been so far.
"Okay, you and Ethan get to the control room and secure it," she suggested. "Alonzo and I will wait here."
"I'm liking this plan," Alonzo added.
"So that if there is a mob of those things at the other end of the room, or one of those doors is open down there, you won't end up trapped," Jackie continued, ignoring him. "We'll be on the outside to help."
Alonzo sighed. "I'm liking this plan less and less," he murmured.
"You sure you can handle it?"
Ditko asked, also ignoring Alonzo.
"You sure you can handle 2 zombies while Ethan watches?"
Jackie asked. The captain glanced back at Ethan, who shrugged, as if he was agreeing he was useless.
"I'll shoot him if I have to," Ditko said, "but I want to save my ammo if I can."
Jackie held up a walkie-talkie and wiggled it.
"Channel 6,
she said.
"Okay," the captain agreed. "Once we're inside the control room, I should be able to hit the lights and figure out what we're dealing with."
"We'll be ready to move,"
Jackie promised. Ditko nodded to Ethan, who begrudgingly nodded that he was ready, tightening his grip on his baseball bat. The captain led them out from hiding, rushing straight over to the closest zombie. The sound of footsteps got its attention, and it turned, only to be greeted with a baseball bat to the top of the head.
"Hit that one again to be sure,"
Ditko cried as he moved on to the next one. Ethan did as he was told, cracking down his bat onto the fallen ghoul. He smacked it a couple of times as the captain went in for the kill on the next one. His old muscles were already burning with exertion, but he swung the bat hard, cracking the ghoul in the side of the head. As it hit the ground, the metallic ting echoed in the room, responded to by a chorus of moaning.
"Get in the control room,"
Ditko cried, panicked.
"Get in the control room!"
He shoved Ethan towards the open door, and the two of them got inside, securing the latch behind them. The captain immediately rushed for the control panel, looking for the right switch. He finally found it and hit the button, floodlights bathing the room in a warm glow. "Holy shit," he breathed. There were 15 zombies in the room, the main door in the back wide open. They were all coming towards the control room, lining up against the glass, smacking on it and drooling dark blood everywhere. He brought the walkie-talkie to his mouth, turning it quickly to Channel 6. "We have a situation here," he said.
How bad is it?
Jackie came back immediately. 15 or 20 of those things in here, he reported. And the door is open. God only knows how many more.
What do you see on the monitors? She asked.
Hang on, he said, and flicked them all on, waiting impatiently for them to warm up. Finally they were on, and he almost wished they weren't. There were zombies all over the facility. The mess hall was mostly empty at least, with only a few stragglers left behind. "The power failed at some point, and the mess hall group got out," he said. "This place is crawling with ghouls."
"What about Axton?" Jackie asked.
Ditko punched on the keys for several rooms, finally finding the right room. A couple of the men inside walked around, with another tossing a ball against the wall and catching it. They all looked bored out of their minds. "Looks like they're alive," he said.
"Okay. And how is the path to them?" she asked.
He studied the monitors, plotting a course through the madness happening inside the prison. The halls were full of zombies, but with the mess hall relatively clear, it was the best option. "Okay, there are a few of those things in the hallway just opposite of this room," he said. "Then it's a straight shot to the mess hall. They're spread out pretty good in there, so you should be able to just run by them to the kitchen."
"Good," Jackie replied. "Then we can use Axton and his buddies to help clear the path back. Is there a weapons room or anything?"
Ditko shook his head. "No guns are allowed in the facility," he said. "However, there are some riot shields and batons in a room near the mess hall. Once you get to them, I can direct you to it. Should give you enough firepower to get back here and get us out of this room."
"When I give you the signal, I want you and Ethan to make as much noise as you can in there," Jackie instructed. "Pull all the attention your way. Alonzo and I will try to sneak around them."
"I also have an alarm I can blare if it comes to that," Ditko said. "It's prison-wide, but it will cover your noise if you need it."
"Let's keep that in our back pocket for now," she replied. "The only noise I want is coming from you."
"Good luck, Jackie," the captain said, and set down the walkie-talkie, motioning to Ethan to get up. "Let's go, kid. Start making some noise." Both men started smacking on the glass, yelling and doing everything they could to pull all the focus to them. Jackie looked through the door, which was cracked open just a smidge, watching as the mob moved around the control room. She looked past them towards the door as several more zombies flowed into the room. After that, however, no more came in for several moments. She spoke quietly to Alonzo.
"If nothing else comes through in 10 seconds, we move," she said. "Stay close, because we're going to hug the wall to get around it."
"What about the lights?" he hissed back. "We're going to be out in the open." She paused, nodding, and lifted the walkie-talkie to her lips again.
"Ditko, can you kill those floods and get us back to emergency lighting?" she asked. "Might give us more cover."
"Consider it done," came the reply, and a second later the floodlights went out, the room dimming back to what it had been before. Jackie nodded to Alonzo, and the two of them breached the door as quietly as they could. The noise in the room was grotesque, a mixture of moans and wet, rotting flesh smacking against glass. The duo moved quickly and silently to their left, staying as close to the wall as they could, which was mostly covered in shadow. They made it to the first emergency light, pausing just outside of range from it. It was only a few yards across the beam of light, but they wanted to make sure nothing was looking at them first. Ditko could see them, barely, and when he did, he started making more noise in their direction, hoping to pull the zombies' attention towards him. As soon as the ghouls turned their heads, Jackie and Alonzo rushed across the light, making it to the other side unnoticed. The rest of the room was a breeze, as the zombies were packed around the control room, with no more coming in. They made it to the door, Jackie readying her bat as they went through to the hallway behind it. A few zombies stood between them and the door to the mess hall, which was clearly visible with the sign above it.
"Vertical strikes," Jackie whispered. "Don't want to risk hitting the wall and letting them know we're here. Plus, I don't want to get caught in your backswing."
Alonzo nodded as they stood shoulder to shoulder in the hallway, walking casually towards the creatures who had just taken notice of them. One by one, the duo smacked zombie heads like whack-a-mole, dropping them to the ground in a heap. Most were prisoners, however there was one guard who'd been chewed up pretty good. They didn't linger, going straight to the mess hall. Jackie cracked open the door, looking inside. There were 5 creatures there, one in the middle with the rest at various points near the wall.
"One in the middle," she whispered. "Just knock it down and keep moving."
"Sure you don't want to take these things out?" Alonzo asked.
She shook her head.
"Why do that when we can let the prisoners do the heavy lifting?"
she asked.
"I'm not one to argue," he said. "Lead the way."
Jackie nodded and they entered the room. As soon as they set foot inside, the zombies took notice, moaning and shambling towards them. Alonzo moved to the front, running towards the ghoul in the middle of the room and smashing his shoulder into its chest, sending it to the ground. This gave them a clear path to the back kitchen, and they burst through the door. As Alonzo entered, a zombie crashed into him, sending them both to the floor. Jackie didn't hesitate, teeing up a golf-style swing with the bat, catching the ghoul under the chin and knocking the corpse off of her friend. Alonzo popped up, grabbing his bat and going wild on his attacker. After the 4th hit to the face, which was already starting to look like ground beef, Jackie smacked him on the shoulder.
"It's dead! Move!" she hissed.
They glanced back to the mess hall, the zombies they'd bypassed gaining ground and moving closer to them. The lead ghoul was just a few yards away from the kitchen door.
"We need to take them out now," Alonzo said. "I don't want to get trapped in that room with the prisoners."
Jackie contemplated for a brief moment before nodding in agreement. The ghouls were too close to them now, and they were in line of sight of the door they had to go through.
"Use the doorway to funnel them in," she instructed. "Should be like shooting fish in a barrel."
Alonzo nodded and waited for the first zombie to get within range. As soon as it crossed the threshold into the kitchen, he brought the bat down with a devastating blow to the top of its skull, crumpling it to the ground. He took a step back, allowing Jackie to swing, catching the next one on the forehead, jerking its head backwards and cracking its neck in the process. They went back and forth a few more times, clearing out the remnants of the ghouls. They stood there for a moment, listening carefully to the noise around them. While they heard moans and shuffling, none of it seemed to be headed in their direction.
"Come on, let's get to the target," she urged.
The 2 of them walked over to the storage door, which was still locked. They looked around on the walls for a camera, which they found, waving to Ditko in the control room. A few seconds later, the light changed color and the door unlatched. They opened it and quickly stepped through, shutting it behind them for safety. The prisoners sat on boxes in a semicircle around the door, as if they'd been expecting them.
"Well, what do you know?" Axton drawled. "Our rescuers have finally arrived."
"About damn time," another one snapped. "What the hell took you so long?"
"It's gotten pretty bad out there," Jackie said. "Like end of the world bad."
"That's not an excuse," another one growled. She jutted out her chin.
"Hey, look, we just got to town a couple days ago and didn't even know you existed until a few hours ago," she snarled. "So save your anger for someone else, yeah?"
Axton held out his hands, palms down, motioning for the other men to calm.
"This young lady is right," he said, offering her a charming smile. "Her and her friend risked their lives to come get us. So we should be thanking them, not verbally abusing them. Now, apologize."
The 2 men who'd spoken hesitated, and Axton's tone grew lethal.
"Levi? Arthur?" He cocked his head. "I said apologize for your rudeness."
Both men muttered apologies as if flipping a switch. Axton returned to his relaxed conversational demeanor.
"Now, as you're probably aware, I'm Axton,"
he said, motioning to himself and then around the circle to the others as he continued to speak.
"This is Levi, Carter, Kai, and Arthur."
"I'm Jackie," she said. "This is Alonzo."
"So, Jackie, first off, thank you for coming to set us free,"
Axton said, pressing his palms together.
"However, I must ask, do you happen to have a plan to get us out of this place? I mean, you did get to our room, so I'm assuming you have a path cleared for us to waltz on out of here."
Alonzo sighed.
"Wish it was that simple," he murmured.
One of our friends, Ethan, is trapped in the control room with Captain Ditko, Jackie explained. There's a couple dozen of those things surrounding them.
Axton grimaced.
So, my old friend Captain Ditko is still alive,
he said, distaste clear in his voice.
Did you hear that, boys? We just might get a chance to ask him why he's left us to rot in here for the last month and a half.
Or we could just leave him to rot,
Kai snarled. Jackie didn't like that one bit, and took a step forward, glaring at the prisoner.
Let me be very clear, she said, tone like ice. If you want out of this room, you're going to help us get our friend out of the control room. If you don't like it, I'll have my friend Alonzo here break your kneecaps and we'll leave you behind.
Kai didn't seem fazed by her threat, almost amused, and glanced at Axton, who stepped forward, still speaking in that charming, sickly sweet tone.
Of course, we'll help you get your friend out of the control room,
he said, holding up his palms.
Kai is just fantasizing a bit, nothing to get worked up over. He's a bit of a free spirit, that one. So being locked in here with the four of us for so long has his mind working on overtime on how to get revenge. But we can work all that out after we all get out of here in one piece.
Carter raised his hand, sitting up straight as if he were in elementary school. Axton motioned to Jackie, giving her control of the room.
Yeah?
She asked, pointing to Carter.
So, if there's as many of those things as you say, how exactly are we supposed to take 'em out? He asked. All we have are a few desk legs.
There's an armory close to here, she explained, waving over her shoulder. No guns, but riot shields and batons. Should be enough to get the job done, especially with a rough-and-tumble group like yours.
Oh, don't worry. We're plenty tough enough to take out the threat, Axton said with a toothy grin. You just lead the way, and we shall follow.
Jackie looked up to the camera, giving it a thumbs up. A moment later the phone rang. She reached for it, but Axton snatched it up first.
Well, hello there, Captain Ditko, he drawled. I have so looked forward to this conversation.
Plenty of time to talk when we're out of here, Ditko replied.
Axton raised a finger.
Well, that is good to know, Captain. I look forward to it.
He inclined his head towards Jackie.
Now I suppose you want to talk to this lovely young woman who you've sent in your place to rescue us.
Yes,
the captain replied firmly. Axton slowly removed the phone from his ear, holding it out to Jackie with a toothy grin.
It would appear as though it's for you, he said sweetly.
She took the phone and pressed it against her ear. Captain, she said, all the while keeping her eyes fixed on the overly charming criminal in front of her.
Are you okay?
Ditko gushed. Yeah, we're good, she assured him. How do we get to the armory, or whatever you call it?
Okay, as soon as you leave that room, go to the left out the back of the kitchen, the captain explained. There's a long hallway that has a few of those things lumbering about. It's the second door down on the right. I will go ahead and unlock it now, so you can spot the light above it.
Okay, we're on the move, Jackie said.
Hey,
he said, voice like steel.
Be careful and watch them.
She didn't take her eyes off of Axton as she said, done and done. She dropped the phone, the cord swinging the receiver back and forth. This is the plan. I need 2 of your men out front to clear the path. We're going out the back of the kitchen to the hallway, and it's the second door on the right, already unlocked. There's a few of those things in the hallway that will need to be taken care of.
And in the room?
Axton asked. Clear, she replied.
He nodded. All right, then, he said, whirling a hand in the air. Levi, Carter, you're up. Clear the path for us. Then stand guard while we get geared up.
Jackie was amazed that the 2 prisoners hopped up and fell into line, as if they were soldiers following orders. You're so going to have to teach me how to do that, she muttered.
While it is a difficult thing to master, with the way you handled Kai, I have no doubt you can pull it off,
he cooed appreciatively. She nodded as the duo of prisoners armed up with their desk legs, long-dried blood still staining the edges. We're ready when you are, she said.
All right, boys, lead the way, Axton barked. We have work to do.
Levi and Carter threw open the door and headed into the kitchen, looking down at the corpses on the ground. They moved quickly but cautiously towards the back door. When they got there, Levi motioned to Carter to open it up, and he did so as soon as the former was ready. Levi didn't hesitate, bursting through the door and running straight for the first zombie he could see. He moved like he had pent-up aggression and rage that had been building every single day he'd been locked up in that room. The first ghoul never saw it coming, a former prisoner with numerous bite marks all over its body. Levi unleashed a violent volley of blows to its head, caving in its skull and sending it to the ground, where he continued to deliver blow after blow after blow. Finally, he stopped when Carter let out a whistle, causing him to look back.
"You mind letting me through?" Carter asked. "There are other things to kill in here."
"Oh, yeah," Levi said, eyes wide and excited, as if he'd forgotten there was more than one zombie. Jackie and Axton stepped through the doorway after Carter, and she fought to hide her horror as she watched the savagery with which the men demolished the creatures. While Alonzo had gone a little overboard with his rage on the zombie that had tackled him, these kills made that one look tame by comparison, not to mention gleeful, like they were relishing in the violence. She swallowed the feelings down for a moment, though. There was lots of work to get done still. "Second door up there," she said. Levi and Carter led them to the armory room, which was a 10 by 10 foot-sized space. As they entered, the light at the top illuminated the walls filled with riot shields and metal batons.
"Let's get geared up," Axton declared. "Time to get us out of here."
Everybody started grabbing items, except for Axton, who walked over to several items that looked like grenades. He picked one up, smiling to himself as he tossed it playfully into the air. "Smoke grenade?" Jackie asked, keeping a close eye on his movements. He shook his head.
"Hornet's nest," he said.
"What's that?" she asked.
"It's like a buckshot shotgun shell, only in grenade form," he explained, catching it and turning it over in his palm. "Supposedly non-lethal ball bearings covered in rubber."
She nodded slowly. "Guessing that stings like a son of a bitch?" she asked.
"You have no idea," he murmured. "They'll use these to quiet down the room when some prisoners get too rowdy. You'll have welts on your body for days."
Jackie pursed her lips. "Seeing as how these things don't feel pain, I'm not sure how this would help us," she said.
"Tell me, have you noticed these bodies deteriorating at all?"
Axton asked, cocking his head.
"Decomposing and the like?"
She nodded thoughtfully. "Oh yeah, they're not doing so hot," she replied.
"Well, with any luck then, these things might just do some damage to them," he said with a grin. "Incapacitate, maybe even land a kill shot or two."
She shrugged, tilting her head back and forth. "It's possible," she agreed. "Couldn't hurt to try, right?"
"My thoughts exactly," he said.
"Not like we have to pay for these things after all," she added. He winked at her.
"There we go. Now you're adjusting to the apocalypse economy," he drawled. "Who needs a budget when everything is on 100% discount?"
Alonzo's brow furrowed as he watched them, clearly concerned about her being so friendly with the prisoner, and she shook her head lightly at him to show that she was okay. She stood up straight, changing the subject before words could be exchanged, wanting to keep everybody on task. "Okay, we ready to go?" she asked loudly. The rest of the guys in the room brandished their shields, smacking the metal batons against them for effect.
"Ready as we're ever going to be," Kai said.
"Okay, let's go clear out the control room," Jackie declared. Chapter 6. Jackie carried a shield of her own, leading the group up to the door of the processing area. She looked through the door, finding some of the zombies had lost interest in the duo trapped inside, and had started wandering around the room. She pulled out her walkie-talkie and raised it to her mouth. "Captain, you copy?" she asked.
"I have you on the monitor," Ditko came back. "Tell me what you want me to do. You want an alarm?"
She shook her head. "No, we can handle it," she said. "You and Ethan just get out of sight."
10-4,
Ditko replied, and the line went dead. Jackie glanced back at Axton, her eyebrow rising that he wasn't carrying a shield.
Okay, we all know the plan, she said, choosing to ignore his choice. Let's get it done.
The men let out a half-hearted yeah, but Axton growled.
She said we all know the plan, so let's get it done, he said, his voice forceful. Everybody good with that?
More enthusiastic noises in the affirmative blared around the group, and he nodded appreciatively.
That's more like it,
he huffed, and inclined his head towards Jackie.
Lead on.
She opened the door and led the group in. She and Alonzo and 3 prisoners set up shields in a semicircle line a few feet inside the door, creating a barrier. They knelt down, providing extra support to the line. Axton and Arthur stood behind them, brandishing their batons.
Come and get us,
Axton bellowed, letting out a loud whistle. The zombies near the back of the group turned, moaning and shambling in their direction. This set off a chain reaction, getting the rest of the ghouls to follow suit. It didn't take long before they were getting close to the line, the others spread out behind them. As soon as the first zombie made it within reach, Arthur swung, cracking into the side of its skull.
"Oh yeah, that felt good,"
he cried with a grin.
"Get down, I'm going to pop this thing off,"
Axton said, holding up the grenade. Arthur ducked down, tapping Jackie on the shoulder to signal her.
"Tilt!"
she yelled, and the shield line tilted upwards to protect their heads. Axton pulled the pin on the hornet's nest, counting down a few seconds before throwing it in the air over the gathering mass of ghouls. He ducked behind the barrier for safety, timing it perfectly so the grenade went off near the ceiling of the room. It was deafening, the explosive sound bouncing off of the walls just like the rubber-coated projectiles. Axton peeked up after the noise settled, happy to see that his prediction was correct. The decomposition on the ghouls was enough to make the hornet's nest be very, very effective. About half of the zombies were on the ground, some motionless, others with significant bodily damage from the ball bearings.
"Nothing like a little decomp to turn non-lethal into very lethal,"
Axton quipped, and motioned to Arthur.
"Come on, boy. Let's pick off the stragglers."
The 2 of them stood up, waiting on the next zombie to get within reach. The hornet's nest had cleared out enough so that the ghouls approached the barricade one by one, allowing for far easier disposal. The entire affair took several minutes, but it wasn't terribly tense. The prisoners having more fun than anything as the zombies had been very affected by the blast. Finally, once the final shambler had been taken down, Axton tapped Jackie on the shoulder.
"We're good," he said. "Let us through, and we'll finish off the wounded."
She stood up, stepping forward to create a hole in the line to allow them to go through. She watched as the 2 of them systematically eliminated the remaining ghouls. She looked over to the control room, seeing a relieved yet concerned look on the captain's face. She gave him a thumbs up, which didn't seem to alleviate his brow.
"Well, Jackie, I want to applaud you on a job well done,"
Axton drawled. She shrugged and offered him a smile.
"You did most of the heavy lifting," she said.
"While this is indeed a fact," he agreed, holding up a hand, "it was your plan that made this incredibly easy. So thank you for setting the stage to show off my abilities."
She chuckled, taken in by his charm, but the mood quickly plummeted as Ditko emerged from the control room, brandishing his gun. The click of the hammer echoed loudly in the space as he aimed at the lead prisoner, his gaze hard. Axton jutted out his chin, all joviality forgotten.
"Now, Captain, why in the world would you go and spoil a perfectly good mood by bringing a firearm into the equation?"
he asked, crossing his arms.
"We just busted our asses to save yours, and you are immediately hostile to us? What kind of message does that send?"
"The message that I'm in charge," Ditko said firmly.
Axton rolled his eyes.
"Was there ever any doubt about that fact, Captain?" he said.
"I wouldn't think so, but I just wanted to be crystal clear,"
Ditko said, eyes wary. Axton's demeanor changed like a flip of a switch from charming to agitated, almost frightening.
"Well, "Captain," he said, voice like a knife's edge, "since you want control of the situation so badly, why don't you do what you're gonna do?"
"We need your help," Jackie said.
Ditko glared at her.
"I'll handle it,"
he snapped. Axton pointed a finger at him.
"Do not take that tone with her,"
he barked, tone rising. Ditko winced, despite being the only one in the room with a gun, and raised his free hand.
"Okay, let's all calm down now,"
he said, voice sounding as if he were forcing it to stay steady.
"I'm plenty calm,"
Axton said, tone cool as ice.
"In fact, I'll show you how calm I am."
He waved a hand to the others to lower their shields and batons.
"Just put them down now."
The prisoners slowly complied, not arguing but seeming begrudging about following his orders. Jackie blinked in surprise that they still did, though.
"Floor is yours, Captain,"
Axton said with a flourish. Ditko straightened, raising his chin.
"Now, before I lay out the terms of your release, I want to know who everybody is," he declared. "Not just who you are, but what you're in for."
"Now what difference does that make?"
Axton asked, putting a hand to his chest.
"It's the end of the world out there, or so I'm told. Does it really matter what we did way back when?"
Ditko nodded.
"It matters to me and to my conscience who I'm setting free," he said firmly.
"Very well,"
Axton said with a shrug and a sigh.
"You already know who I am."
He motioned to the first prisoner to his right.
"I'm Levi,"
he said, motioning between himself and Axton.
"Whatever you're charging him with, pretty sure you're charging me with, too, since I was there when you picked him up."
As soon as he finished, the next one stepped up.
"I'm Carter, got convicted of aggravated assault, picked up another decade for killing a prisoner."
His lip curled downwards.
"It was self-defense, not that anybody would listen."
"Kai, aggravated assault," Kai cut in, sounding impatient. "Somebody in the neighborhood was running their mouth, so I gave them an education on why that wasn't a good idea."
"I'm Arthur,"
the last prisoner said.
"Drug trafficking and some various gang-related charges."
Ditko raised an eyebrow.
"Same gang as Axton and Levi?"
he asked. Arthur shook his head.
"Got picked up outside of Dallas, so no," he replied.
"Are you satisfied now, Captain?"
Axton drawled.
"We're not mass murderers out here terrorizing the population."
Ditko's gaze narrowed.
"That remains to be seen," he said.
"Fair enough,"
Axton replied with a breezy shrug.
"But you went to the trouble of breaking us free, so I assume there's a reason other than just out of the goodness of your heart. So, why don't you lay out the situation for us?"
Ditko took a deep breath.
"We're having trouble with your old gang," he said.
"Not sure why you would be having problems with them,"
Axton replied, almost sounding bored.
"Now old Zeke might have been cross with you for not releasing me when all this started, but I can't see him being trouble for you."
The captain's gaze darkened.
"Well, you're wrong on old Zeke, because he led a group into town to try and get you," he said. "Things went south, some people ended up dead, Zeke included."
Axton's expression hardened, eyes blazing.
"So, who's leading the Knights?" he demanded.
"Apollo," Jackie replied. Axton shook his head, letting out a sigh.
"Yeah, with him in charge, you are definitely having some problems with the Knights," he said.
"That's certainly one way of putting it,"
Ditko muttered. "He killed several of our men, took another one prisoner," Jackie said and held up her wounded hand, "and took my finger." Axton tongued his cheek.
"Well, let me guess. You came in here to get me out, hoping that I would go deal with your Apollo problem," he drawled. "That about sum it up?"
"In a manner of speaking,"
Ditko said dryly.
"So, what would I get for accomplishing this task?"
Axton asked, spreading his hands, a smile unfurling on his face.
"Because it's not an easy thing to do, since Apollo has a lot of people on his side. If I'm going to risk my life, then it's going to have to be something pretty big."
Ditko scowled.
"You get your freedom, that's more than enough,"
he snapped. Axton barked a laugh.
Nah, my freedom's not worth that, he drawled. Can't enjoy freedom if I'm dead. Come on, Captain. You can do better than that.
Jackie stared at Ditko, eyes wide, urging him to spit out the deal they'd discussed. But he didn't seem to be able to bring himself to do it. She sighed and stepped in. "The town will provide you and the Knights with a steady food supply," she said. "With conditions, of course." Axton grinned.
Ah, now you see there, Captain. This is how you encourage someone, he declared. Not with threats or a gun, but with deals. Carrot works a lot better than the stick. I am intrigued, Jackie. What are these conditions?
"You eliminate Apollo and take back control of the gang," she explained. "Once you do that, you keep them in Dumas and don't bother the town up here." Axton pursed his lips.
So you're going to buy peace with food, he mused. Not opposed to that.
"And your gang keeps an eye on the road from Amarillo," she added. He cocked a brow.
Interesting request, he said. Easily done, but I am curious as to the reason.
"We fled a huge mob that was coming up the road from Amarillo," Jackie explained. "Could be more that follow them, and knowing that is beneficial to both sides, wouldn't you agree?" He nodded.
I concur, he said. So that's it then. We promise not to attack you and keep an eye out for those things, and you keep us fed?
"Pretty much," Jackie replied with a shrug. "Oh, and giving us back our man Travis if he's still alive."
"I agree to those terms," Axton declared, holding up a finger. "Assuming you meet my demands." "You don't get to make demands," Ditko snapped. "Oh, but I believe I do," Axton sang. "You're backed into a corner, which is why you're here making me a sweetheart of an offer. Now don't worry, I'm not asking for anything outlandish."
"I said no," Ditko growled. Axton rolled his eyes.
"At least have the common decency to hear my request before turning it down," he said.
"If he won't, I will," Jackie cut in. "What would you like?"
"Jackie,"
Ditko hissed, but she shot daggers at him with her glare, and he visibly withered beneath it, closing his mouth. She turned back to Axton. "Go on," she said, waving a hand to him.
"When I was arrested, I had some personal effects that were taken," he explained. "Most of them were inconsequential, like my wallet, because it's not like money is good these days. But there was one item that I require, my father's pocket watch. It's gold, with a chain and an inscription. It should have been transferred up here when I was moved."
Ditko wrinkled his nose.
"We'll see,"
he huffed dismissively.
"No, Captain,"
Axton said, his tone turning deadly serious once again.
"This isn't a we'll see moment. I'm not one of your grandkids wanting to go see a movie that you can just say no to and brush off. This is a non-negotiable demand that will be met. Or are you willing to let your quaint little town get wiped off of the map by Apollo over this?"
Ditko sneered.
"Maybe, if you asked me nicely," he said,
tone more dickish than Jackie liked. She could see shit going bad quickly, with all of the testosterone brewing in the room, and these two at each other's throats. She didn't think that Ditko could keep control of the situation, even if he was the only one with a gun. Boys, she declared. "Don't make me use my mom voice on you." Both men stepped back from each other, and she pointed to them in turn. "Now, this is what's going to happen," she said firmly. "Captain, you're going to retrieve that watch." His eyes widened.
"Like hell I..."
"Yes, you are," she snapped, holding up a finger. "And you're going to hold on to it while Axton here lives up to his end of the bargain. He removes Apollo from command of the Knights and brings back Travis."
"Assuming he's still alive,"
Axton added. Jackie nodded, waving a hand at him. "As long as he makes his best effort to bring Travis back," she amended. "At the exchange, we get Travis, he gets his watch. The rest of the deal goes into effect. Everybody cool with that?" The two men stared each other down, but it was the prisoner that spoke up first.
"I am perfectly fine with that arrangement,"
Axton said. Ditko glared at him for another moment, finally crossing his arms and letting out a huff of breath.
Yeah, fine, he said sullenly. We have a deal.
Fantastic, Jackie said, saluting with the fingers of her good hand curled into devil horns. So let's get— I do have one more demand, Axton cut in.
Oh, here we go, Ditko gushed. Already breaking the deal.
Jackie sighed, putting her hand to her forehead in exasperation, especially after she'd gone to bat for the guy. Really? She sighed. Another demand?
Okay, more of a request,
Axton said, amusement dancing in his eyes at having disarmed them so easily. She shook her head. Fine, let's hear it, she said.
My boys and I have been living off of cold canned goods for the last 6 weeks, Axton said. If we're going to do this, we're going to need a real meal before we go. I know that fresh stuff is probably out of the question, but at least something cooked.
Jackie snorted. You know, I agree with you, she said, holding up her injured hand. I'm going to need a meal too. I went a little extreme with the diet, so need to perk up a bit.
Ditko scoffed. Fine. We'll go to the restaurant in town. It's still operational, at least somewhat, he said, then his tone turned mocking. Now, if there isn't anything else you'd like to demand, can we get going?
I'm all demanded out, Captain, Axton drawled with a flourish. Please, by all means, lead the way. Our stomachs are rumbling, and you have the key to fix it.
He and Jackie shared a glance as Ditko led the way towards the exit. They nodded at each other, and though she was pretty sure she couldn't trust him farther than she could throw him, a little mutual appreciation couldn't hurt. They were on this path they were on now, and nothing was going to change it. Chapter 7. Ditko sat at the corner table of the restaurant with his gun resting in his lap, watching as everyone else dined on a country buffet of various foods. There was fried canned meat, macaroni and cheese, various canned veggies, and, most importantly, fresh, right out of the oven biscuits.
Oh my God,
Axton moaned around a mouthful of the salty sweet dough.
This is the best thing I've had in my mouth in forever.
He swallowed and looked over at the older woman cooking, curling his fingers into an A-OK sign.
Ma'am, my compliments to you. What I'm about to say is sacrilege around my family, but this biscuit is just as good as the ones my granny used to make. Just don't go spreading that around, because if she found out, she'd haunt my ass from beyond the grave.
She chuckled. Well, thank you, son, she said. You let me know if you need more. I'm always happy to bake up a fresh batch.
That is mighty kind of you, ma'am,
Axton said. The woman headed back to tend to the kitchen, and for a time there was nothing but the sounds of chewing and the occasional moan of pleasure at flavors and warm textures in their mouths. Finally, Axton pushed his empty plate away.
Jackie, I have a pressing question for you that I don't think I can wait any longer to ask, he declared.
She smirked. Sorry, but I'm not your type, she teased. Laughter rippled around the table, Arthur spitting crumbs clear across the table onto Alonzo, who looked less than amused.
Well, we did just meet, so I have a little time to work my mojo on you, Axton said with a wink. But that's not what I was wondering.
She waved a hand before breaking off another piece of her own biscuit. Then, by all means, ask away, she said.
I want to know how you came face to face with Apollo and made it home alive, he said.
She shrugged, swallowing down the echoes of panic and helplessness from her time with the bikers on the road. I don't know the man, so I can't speak to his mindset, but I can tell you what happened, she said, clearing her throat. You can infer whatever you want from that.
Fair enough, he agreed. So, how'd you get home?
For starters, this isn't my home, she began. Just happened to stumble across this town while escaping a mob from Amarillo in our tour bus.
Axton cocked a brow. A musician, huh? He asked. I like it. Continue.
When I was face to face with Apollo, I was pretty sure he was going to kill me, she continued, squishing the last of the dough between her fingers as her appetite left her.
Some of his men wanted to take me back with them as a party favor, if you understand my meaning. To his credit, he shot that down."
Axton waved his hands back and forth in front of his face.
"Oh, let's be clear about something," he cut in. "He didn't shoot that down. He knew that if he did that, the women in our gang would have run him up a flagpole by his twig and berries. That was nothing more than self-preservation."
"Well, whatever the reason, he was adamant that it wasn't going to happen," she said. "Instead, he took something from me, either as a trophy or simply because he was sadistic. Regardless, I'm down a finger. He sent me back with a message. Don't set foot in Dumas."
Axton pursed his lips for a moment.
Maybe he's getting soft," he murmured. "That's not the Apollo I remember. At any rate, glad you made it back. I don't think I would be out of that room if you hadn't."
She looked at him for a moment, surprised, and it stretched on longer than was comfortable for those around them, because Kai slapped the table to break it.
"So, why don't you want to tell us what we're going to do?" he demanded loudly. "Where are we going and all that?"
"Yeah," Arthur agreed around a mouthful of canned meat. "If I'm walking into a suicide mission, it would be nice to know."
"Jackie, you seem to be the woman with the plan," Axton said, leaning back in his chair with a smile on his face. "Why not enlighten us with what you know?"
She took a deep breath and tore a bite from her biscuit, determined to get back on track.
"Okay," she finally said. "Dumas has been overrun with zombies, and there's a huge mob coming up from Amarillo. We were in Cactus trying to clear a traffic jam in the hopes that when that mob comes marching through, it dislodges the mob in Dumas and pushes them out."
"So what's so important in Dumas?" Carter asked.
She bit back, telling them about the gun store, knowing that would be an idiotic mistake.
"Nothing in particular," she replied. "It's just we don't want that many zombies being this close to town."
"Fair enough,"
Carter agreed with a shrug, and she internally sighed with relief.
"The plan, as best as I can tell at the moment," she continued, "is that we take the long way around through Cactus to avoid the mob, get to the other side of Dumas and to whatever home base the Knights have, and let Axton do his thing."
"Sounds great in theory, but not as easy in practice," he spoke up.
She cocked her head.
"What do you mean?" she asked.
"Our old clubhouse was about 15 miles outside of Dumas," Axton explained. "Chances are Apollo doesn't have them there."
"What makes you say that?" Alonzo asked. Axton motioned with his hands as he spoke.
"Because if they were coming all the way up to Cactus, they're more likely holed up at someplace closer," he replied. "My guess is a farm."
"A farm?"
Ethan asked, setting down his fork.
"Lots of space," Axton explained. "House for the higher-ups in the club, barns for the lower-level guys, and a lot easier on fuel. It's been 6 weeks, so they're going to be running low on it by now."
"Oh, shit," Levi muttered. Kai cocked a brow.
"What?"
he asked. "If fuel is running low, they ain't going to be giving us a truck to drive out there," Levi said. Kai's eyes widened.
"What the hell they giving us then?" he asked.
"Hope you like horseback riding," Jackie quipped.
Kai tossed his fork down onto his plate in frustration.
"Son of a bitch," he huffed.
"Told you," Levi added.
"All right, that's enough,"
Ditko bellowed, shoving his seat back from his table and getting to his feet.
"You got your meal. Sun ain't getting any higher in the sky. It's time for you to saddle up and head out."
Axton shook his head.
"I appreciate your enthusiasm to see us off, Captain, but there's nowhere near enough time for us to get to the other side of Dumas," he said.
"Don't worry, I got us a stopping point if we need it," Jackie replied. "If not, we can push on to Cactus and hole up there."
Ditko jutted out his chin, tapping his foot impatiently. Axton shrugged, shoving his own chair back.
"All right, guess we're saddling up then," he said.
Everyone got up and headed out of the restaurant, with the captain pointing to the way towards the barricade at the underpass. As they walked, he turned to Jackie.
"Why don't you go on ahead and draw him a map so he knows where to go?" he asked.
"Won't be necessary," she replied, shaking her head. "I'm going with them."
Ditko stared at her, wide-eyed.
"Absolutely not," he breathed.
She crossed her arms.
Captain, do you want to know what happened to the last man who tried to tell me I couldn't do something that was none of his business? She asked.
Ditko blinked at her, apparently afraid of the answer to that question.
Not trying to tell you what to do, Jackie,
Alonzo spoke up, keeping stride with her.
But he's right. You don't need to be going out there with them. I am standing right here, you know,
Axton quipped. Ditko growled. Trust me, we know, he snapped.
I'm going, and that's it, Jackie declared. I've been out there. I know where the safe stop is, and they could use my help.
It's dangerous, Ditko said lamely, as if he'd already lost the argument, which he had.
You don't say,
Jackie said, drawing out the words with heavy sarcasm.
Everything we do out here is dangerous. But they have Travis, and they're doing God knows what to him. I know the way, I'm capable in a fight, and it's going to speed things up.
Axton smirked.
Besides, Captain, why in the world would I let anything happen to her? He drawled. You and I have a deal in place, a deal that not only provides for my people, but also gets back my father's watch. You think I'm going to risk that?
From what I've read about your case, you're capable of anything,
Ditko grumbled.
Then you should go back and read some more, Axton said, his tone flicking to deadly serious. Because I didn't get to the position I was in because I was brutal for the sake of being brutal. I was smart about it. Cut deals that benefited me and mine. I knew how bad it was to break those deals.
He cocked a brow.
Jackie's right. Having her along will speed things up, and I'm adding her safety to the deal we struck. Does that satisfy you?
The captain didn't respond verbally, but he let out a grunt as they continued to walk.
I'll take that as a yes,
Axton said brightly, his tone changing. When they reached the barricade, Alonzo took Jackie's arm, pulling her to face him and asking quietly,
Are you sure about this?
She shrugged.
Not particularly, she admitted.
Then why are you doing it? He asked.
Because I want to get Travis, she said. And, I don't know, there's something about Axton.
He blinked at her in shock.
Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're... What? Hell no, she hissed, smacking his arm. No, it's just... I know Ditko doesn't trust him, and he's a criminal and all that. But maybe if I can put a bug in his ear that this town will live up to the deal we struck, he'll be more inclined to honor it too.
His gaze softened.
It's a big risk, he said. Not as big of a risk as letting Ditko speak for everybody, Jackie said firmly.
He sighed.
Yeah, that's a fact, he agreed.
You coming?
Axton called from the top of the barricade. She nodded and clambered up.
Yep, let's do it,
she said, throwing a glance back at her companions.
Be back as soon as I can,
she promised, and joined the rest of the men on horseback. They kicked off and started riding towards Cactus. The trio stood beside each other, watching as the horses vanished on the horizon. Alonzo raised his chin.
Captain, you should know that the only reason she's going with them is to make sure the deal holds, he said, slowly but firmly. If you know what's good for you, you'll keep your end.
Ditko smirked, and Alonzo wasn't sure if it was because he was brushing it off, or was just amused by the threat, but it was done. He tapped Ethan on the arm, and they headed back towards town.
She's going to be all right, isn't she?
Ethan asked quietly. Alonzo nodded.
She's a tough girl, he said, but man, the next few days are going to be mighty interesting.
The end.